So let's finally look at returns to scale. And what returns to scale is really about is changing all levels of input. So it's kind of concentrated, with marginal product, holding one input constant. What happens if we increase the other input? Well, now we're going to be increasing all these inputs and thinking about what happens to the level of production. So what happens if we increase all inputs by a constant factor? For example, we double the amount of input 1 and input 2. If production doubles, we call that constant returns to scale. So what that kind of looks like mathematically would be 2 times output of x1, x2 equals production level if we just double the amount of each of these inputs. So just doubling the amount of input 1 and the input 2 produces 2 times the output we had before. In general, you can think of, instead of just necessarily doing 2, you can make it more general in that t times f of x1, x2 equals f of t x1 and t x2. Where t is greater than 1 here. So that'd be like constant returns to scale to add this relationship. It's also possible to have increasing or decreasing returns to scale. And I'll raise this board and talk about this in a second and draw and write out the mathematical notation for this. But the idea here is that if we double the inputs, we double production. Well, decreasing returns to scale mean we double the inputs, we get less than double the production out of it. Whereas increasing returns to scale mean if we double the inputs, we get more than double the amount of output. So that's the idea, and it really depends on the technology and the production function we're looking at. All right, so let's kind of write out what having increasing returns to scale means mathematically. Kind of just explain what it means kind of intuitively. So here, f of t times x1, t times x2, so scaling up the amount of inputs by some constant factor t, is greater than t times x1, f of x1, x2. So doubling the amounts of inputs is going to produce more than double the amount of output that we produced before. So I think the book gives a nice example with like the diameter, increase in the diameter of a pipeline. If we increase the diameter of a pipeline, that's not going to cost us much more inputs, but we're going to get a much, the flow of whatever we're producing, so oil or something or whatever's being transported in this pipeline is going to increase by more than that amount of inputs that we had to put in, just because of, physically, like how much more we can get through, how much more liquid or whatever we can get through this pipeline. Decreasing returns to scale. If we double the size of a pipeline, we get more than double the size of like the width of or the diameter of the pipeline, we get more than double the amount of product that can flow through it, is the idea. So decreasing returns to scale, what that looks like is going to be the opposite, right? Where if we increase the amount of each input by a constant scale, so T here, so think that has been like 2 or 3 or 10, we're going to get less than, we're going to get less than T times the old level of production. So this would be decreasing returns to scale. So production, at some, at different points of production, we could have different kinds of returns to scale. So maybe on low levels of production, we could have increasing returns to scale. At some level of medium level production, we have constant returns to scale, and then some high level production, we have decreasing returns to scale. So the returns to scale can change depending on the level of production as well. That's something to keep in mind. It's a very general concept. It doesn't mean that a production function has to always have one of these certain properties, like it's always decreasing, increasing, or constant. In general, it doesn't have to happen, though with the production functions we're looking at, we might be using production functions that have one of these properties as opposed to multiple of these properties.